Nation, the Constitution is null and void, a six-part series of panel discussions centered around the topics highlighted in the documentary Betrayal of a Nation, which I co-produced. My name is Trina Asidu, and tonight, as promised, we are live here on Facebook, and our talkback will be on Clubhouse at 9 p.m. We want to hear your thoughts. I'm so sorry about that. We want to hear your thoughts on the topics, so please join us and speak your truth. We will be live every Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern for the next 3 weeks. Tonight's show is part 3 of our discussion, the execution of Black leaders. We are trying to galvanize support behind this documentary, and we really need your help. So I'm asking our viewers today to please take a minute to share this live video and personally invite 5 people who you feel will be enlightened and inspired by this discussion.
I'm Brandy Webb, and I am the director of Betrayal of a Nation. Betrayal of a Nation is a documentary that puts the United States government on trial for crimes committed against Black and Brown citizens. Betrayal of a Nation will premiere soon in the upcoming weeks. Once we are able to make an official announcement, we will let you know where and when to tune in. So in the meantime, allow tonight's discussion to get your wheels turning and your fire burning. So before we kick off with our panelist introductions, I'm going to play a short promo clip that gives you a little sneak peek into the documentary.
If you or I commit a crime, we go to jail.
So why would it be any different for the institution that set the example?
America needs to be taken to trial by the world.
It should have been held accountable for Emmett Till and everybody else.
Government of the United States, you are charged with hate crimes for enabling racists to spew hate towards Black and Brown communities.
You are charged with obstruction of justice for lying about the course of investigations as it relates to citizens of color.
You are charged with rape,
Child abuse,
aggravated assault, murder in the first degree, and voluntary manslaughter.
Cruel and unusual punishment.
You may be seated.
Whew. Okay. So that was a little sneak peek for you all. All right, so I am excited to introduce to you tonight's panelists. We have a panelist of 4 brothers that are doing some extraordinary work in Black culture, and they are doing their part in this movement for Black liberation. So first up, we have the award-winning Keith A. Beauchamp. So on May 10th, 2004, the United States Department of Justice reopened the 50-year-old murder case of Emmett Till, citing Beauchamp's documentary, The Untold Story of Emmett Lewis Till. As both a major factor, this was a major factor in their decision, and it was a starting point for their investigation. So Mr. Beauchamp has devoted the past 22 years of his life telling the story of Emmett Till, and I consider him to be the leading Emmett Till scholar. In 2007, he began his collaboration with the FBI's new Civil Rights Cold Case Initiative, producing documentaries on other unsolved civil rights murders in hopes of helping federal agents with their investigations that could lead to bringing remaining perpetrators to justice. Beauchamp's past works include TV1's Murder in Black and White, Wanted Justice, Johnny May Chappelle for the History Channel, BET's Exceptional Black Women, and The Injustice Files, an award-winning crime reality series on the ID Network. Keith Beauchamp is currently the producer of the upcoming feature film, Till, which is being co-produced by Fred Zolo, Whoopi Goldberg, and Barbara Broccoli.
So we brought back Michael Obi, who spoke last week in part 2 of the discussion. Michael, or Professor Obi as I like to call him, is a native of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He has done extensive research on the historical Black press. He is the author of Black press coverage of the Emmett Till lynching, a catalyst to the civil rights movement, Michael also published work on the Tuskegee Airmen, which includes interviews with several of the famous flyers. Michael Obey is featured in the Betrayal of a Nation documentary, and he is currently teaching communications at Clark Atlanta University.
All right. And next up, we have the Reverend Mark Thompson. Reverend Thompson has spent most of his life as a political, civil rights, and human rights activist and organizer. He not only has been a part of every major social movement and event over the past 35 years, okay? But he has also been a radio broadcaster for 3 decades, and he has spent over 10 years as a television commentator as well. Reverend Thompson is the host of Make It Plain, a political human rights and breaking news daily podcast. He interviewed every major candidate who sought the 2020 Democratic presidential nomination. He broadcast from Johannesburg and Soweto during the first ever Democratic elections in 1994 in South Africa, and was honored as the 104th annual NAACP convention in Orlando in July 2013 for 25 years of crusading journalism and outstanding leadership in furthering the work of civil and human rights.
And last but not least, we're also pleased to introduce to you Austin Julio Broughton. Austin has coined himself a dynamic and powerful public speaker with over 17 years of speaking background. Austin Julio Broughton, an Atlanta, Georgia native, known also by the nickname Dr. Julio, is most well known for his awe-inspiring renditions of the works of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He has traveled the U.S. delivering several keynotes along political and civil rights leaders. He now has embarked on a journey to inspire those who he speaks to push further and to find a spark that lights their own fire. He currently majors in political science and intends to run for political office to truly unite the United States of America.
Whew. Didn't we tell y'all we had some exciting panelists tonight?
Yes.
All right. So I think that it's very important to kick off this conversation talking about Emmett Till. So the brutal murder of 14-year-old Emmett Till in 1955 was the catalyst to the civil rights movement. It sparked outrage and inspired many African-American leaders to advocate for justice. Professor Obey, as I like to call, can you explain how the media played a key role in alerting the nation about what was happening to Black people in America at that time?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Webb, as I like to call you. Just full disclosure, Ms. Webb was my student at Clark Atlanta University, and all these years later, I think about 12 years later, she's still my #1 student. Okay.
HBU.
Well, the first thing I have to say is that, you know, if I had to say it in a statement, the Black press humanized Emmett Till. We know that there were many, many Black folk, men and women, who were lynched before and after Emmett Till, but they were basically nameless and faceless. Some estimates say there were 2,000, some say there were 5,000, but I believe there were probably many, many more. I believe that many people probably just came up missing and just were never heard of again, and they weren't counted in these numbers. But the Black press basically, starting off, I think you cannot talk about this without talking about his mother, Miss Mamie Till, made this decision to have his casket open at the funeral in Chicago. Chicago is significant too. But when the Chicago was the home of Jet Magazine, also the home of the Chicago Defender newspaper. Both of these publications showed these macabre photographs of Emmett Till. So obviously, Black folk consumed this. And let me just give you a little bit of background on the African-American press. Many newspapers popped up over the United States in the late 1800s and beyond because white publications did not see African Americans as newsworthy. So all these publications, basically many of them told the story of Emmett Till and covered the trial, covered the murder, covered the aftermath of the trial, and they also covered an infrastructure that was built after this, because there were many meetings that happened. There was a lot of fundraising that happened. Emmett Till died in August of 1955. And I know many people associate Rosa Parks as being like the catalyst that started the civil rights movement. But between August and December 1955, there was infrastructure that was built. There was fundraising that was done. There was a lot of connections that were made that were, because of Emmett Till, that were utilized when it came time for the whole Rosa Parks thing to happen. Now, not only, and again, we got to think about the fact, again, that Jet Magazine and the Chicago Defender were based out of Chicago. That's where Emmett Till was from. So they had a vested interest in telling the story of this young boy being lynched. Another thing I want to mention is that not only did they show the photograph of Emmett Till in this macabre state that he was in, but they also showed him as a young boy and being alive and being well. And he was a very handsome looking little boy. So that just kind of really humanized him with Black folk. Now, another thing I want to say is that you got to juxtapose this with the way the white press covered Emmett Till. And I want to give a couple of quick examples, and I'm going to let somebody else talk. There was one story in the Atlanta Constitution where I am right now, and the title of the story was Half Brothers Indicted in Death of Wolf Whistle Boy. So they basically called him a wolf whistle boy. So they made him become the predator. He became the demon in this story, whereas he was in the ground dead. You know, these men had brutally murdered him, but they covered him as a demon or as the villain in this story. There was also a case where they called it actually a wolf whistle case. It wasn't a wolf whistle case, it was a murder case. They murdered this kid. Now, so you see there was a huge difference. And then there's lots of other evidence that the mainstream papers covered him in that way. They demonized him. And we see that still exists today. We just go back as far as like Trayvon Martin, for example. Trayvon Martin smoked weed. He had gang signs. He did this on his social media, whereas he was in the ground dead, where they have this. They demonized the Black kid instead of properly investigating this murder. But I also, want to say also that these, like the New York Amsterdam News was another one that was based out of Harlem that really kind of told these stories. But all the newspapers, I mean, this was big news in the Black community, and Black folk really followed this story from the beginning all the way beyond the end of the story. So to answer that question, they humanized Emmett Till, and in doing that, they humanized, many thousands of lynching victims.
Thank you. Mr. Beauchamp, what are some of the roadblocks you encounter in getting the Emmett Till case reopened?
Well, I have to say, my investigation into the murder of Emmett Till happened in the early 90s. And so actually 95 to be exact. That was the first time I actually set foot in the Delta of Mississippi where the murder occurred. But before I did that, I needed support from the family, because there was no way that I would have decided to take on this story, to produce a film, if I didn't have the support of the family, including, of course, Mother Mobley. And so at the time I met Mother Mobley, I decided I would travel into the Delta of Mississippi just to get the experience of my own. I had never been in the area. I know that I possibly drove through the area because I'm originally from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And so I went to Southern University. We go to the games all the time. So I'm sure I went through the area. It's just that I never realized the magnitude of the history that lies in the Delta. And I never had that interest into the Till murder case until I saw the photograph at the age of 10. And of course, that was always, Emmett was sort of a kindred spirit in my life in some way. But getting back to your question, when I got into the Delta of Mississippi, it was as if time stood still. Here you have plantations, people were still working in the fields. I was very shocked and surprised. And it was also a moment in time where I had just moved to New York City. So I was going back and forth, and when I got there, I stuck out like a sore thumb, especially with the clothing that I was wearing. My style had changed and things of that nature. But the story of Emmett Till among African Americans in the area was not supposed to be talked about. And so a lot of my time and effort was taken trying to convince people to speak to me. And this is including family members of Emmett Till who still lived in the area as well. So my film, The Untold Story of Emmett Till, took me 9 years to make. And people often wonder and ask me why it took so long. It took that long because I had to gain the trust of the people who lived in the community to get them to trust me enough to talk to me, of course, and tell me their stories. So the name Emmett Till, once again, from 1995, even until now, is still a difficult topic to talk about in this particular area of Mississippi. This is where your Dixiecrat hatred comes from. This is where the formation of the citizens' councils and different organizations that countered integration and was against, of course, civil rights had actually formed. And so, you know, it's a story that is, as you know, very deep to me. It's been a long journey for myself. Mother Mobley passed away in 2003, a year right before the case was reopened. And we are currently still fighting for justice as we speak.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Beauchamp, for the work that you have done and the work that you continue to do in, you know, getting Emmett Till's story told out there. And so I know that the local officials, they tried to stop Emmett Till's, sorry about that, they tried to stop Emmett Till's body from being returned to his mother. And the trial was a mockery of hearings. Can you provide a little bit of a brief insight on the lengths that the government will go to cover up the very crimes that they permitted to happen?
Well, I mean, you're talking about a time, 1955, before the civil rights movement. And so, unfortunately, during those days, we didn't have a lot of wiggle room to make decisions, you know, on our own. We could have, of course, we had the muscle to do it, but it was very dangerous at that time to make those decisions, because if you made a decision, it could not only harm yourself, but your family. But when Emmett's body was found, the sheriff, H.C. Strider of Tallahatchie County, told Emmett's grandfather, Moses Wright, that he needed to bury that body before the sun went down. And of course, that's when you had the family come together, and Emmett was almost buried in his grandfather's graveyard of his church. But what ends up happening, as they were lowering the body, Sheriff George Smith, and I hate to differentiate these people in this way, the good sheriff, came out and stopped the burial because Mother Mobley had gathered a team of people around her, the NAACP, as well as a number of officials throughout Chicago, Richard Darley and others, and they all were calling for the body to be returned. And so it became a big issue in the state of Illinois and Mississippi. And so when they finally decided to release the body, of course, they had the Mississippi State seal on it, which forbid Mother Mobley from opening the casket. So when she received the body, she had to suffer another injustice by having to deal with the fact that she may not be able to open up the casket. But defying all the odds, she made her courageous stance to open the casket, because in her words, she didn't know what was possibly in this box, in the casket itself. It could have been somebody else's body, could have been rocks, and so on. But of course, it ended up being her son, Emmett Till. And that's how she was able to get the body back. It was a lot of pressure that was done in Illinois and Chicago in particular by the NAACP and state officials that forced the body to be brought back into Chicago.
Wow. Thank you. So let's talk about Cointelpro, a counterintelligence program run by the FBI. Its mission was to disrupt, dismantle, and discredit Black organizations and their leaders. They followed, surveilled, and wiretapped individuals, which ultimately led to the conspiring of Dr. King, Malcolm X's, and Fred Hampton's deaths, among others. So, Reverend Thompson, why are Black leaders, those whose ancestors built this nation and who are advocating for fair and just treatment, a threat?
Well, thank you for having me as well, both of you, and greetings to my brother and the fellow panelists. Good to see my good friend Keith as well. The work that Keith has done uncovering what truly happened to Emmett Till has been invaluable in our ongoing struggle, and is part of the unfinished business that we have. The purpose of Cointelpro, as documented, was to prevent the rise of a Black Messiah. The government, the federal government, J. Edgar Hoover knew that if our people were well organized and were unified under one or even several leaders, because it's interesting, they said a Black Messiah, it really should have been plural, because there were several who were going to make a difference. And that was a threat to them, and a threat to the very existence of the United States government. In preparing for tonight and dealing in the context of Emmett Till, I revisited someone whose name most recently came up in the Georgia runoffs, and was used, his name came up in 2008, was used again this time to try to defeat Raphael Warnock. It didn't hurt. And that was Professor Dr. James Cone, the father of Black liberation theology. What's important in this discussion tonight, he wrote a book entitled The Cross and the Lynching Tree. And we find that what happened to Christ, and this doesn't matter whether you're religious or not, but just bear with me. The story of Christ is that he was executed by the state for leading a movement that was spiritual and socio-political. Many of us believe he was a man of color, a Black man. Well, when we think about what happened to Emmett Till, it was his lynching, in fact, his crucifixion, so to speak, that sparked a movement that is still ongoing. And then when you put with that the federal government referred to the leaders in our movement as messiahs themselves, you see a direct analogy and the very threat that we caused, that our people caused, that our movement did cause. And so I think that when we look at all of this, there is quite a bit of unfinished business in addition to Emmett Till. But most importantly, the unfinished business for us as a people is to continue our movement, continue our struggle. A lot of people think the civil rights movement just stopped, like people lost interest. Like people lose interest in stuff now. We get busy and we deprioritize it. That's not what happened. This was a campaign and a system of state-sponsored terrorism, true terrorism that affected our movement and caused, they killed Dr. King, they killed Malcolm X, they killed Medgar Evers and countless others. They killed Fred Hampton. They killed Emmett Till. They killed all of these individuals. And that is what had an effect on our movement. And as Dr. John Henry Clark said, lastly, our duty when someone takes one of our leaders out, and if we're on chapter 13, to bury the leader and then go on to chapter 14. We have no excuse. We have to pick up, keep on moving, and learn from the advances those leaders made while they were alive and continue their work.
Thank you, Reverend Thompson. That was said so eloquently. You do not disappoint.
Yes. So I have a question for the panel. So the FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover, issued directives governing Cointelpro, ordering FBI agents to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize the activities of these movements, and especially their leaders. So panelists, what does it mean to neutralize a man? And I will start with Dr. Julio. your
So to neutralize a man simply means to take him out of the equation. It means to make him and make his efforts minuscule or meaningless, or in other words, tear down the character of a person so that their stance is viewed as insignificant. The greatest example of that, they wanted to neutralize Dr. King. So the FBI would send wiretaps or place bugs in his hotel rooms. They would place and have wiretaps on his phones. They even went so far as to send him a letter basically urging him to commit suicide for the various, because of they had recordings of some of the extracurricular activities, so to speak, that Dr. King engaged in on the road during the civil rights movement. So the goal was to demean the character of the person so that their contributions to society would be seen as meaningless. That's what it means to neutralize a man.
Thank you. And Mr. Beauchamp, what does neutralizing a man mean to you?
Well, I mean, it's just what Brother Julio just stated. I would like to just tap on, or should I say, follow behind Brother Thompson on this. He mentioned, Thomas, on this. Brother Thomas mentioned the assassinations of Medgar and Dr. King and so on. I don't want us to get too far ahead of ourselves here, because there were some things that happened in 1955 that I believe inspired J. Edgar Hoover to create the Cointelpro. And these are things such as the Citizens Council of Mississippi that was formed right off the heels of Brown versus Board of Education that ended the segregation in public schools. Emmett Till's murder happened in 55, but just before his murder takes place, you have the murder of Reverend George W. Lee out of Belzoni, Mississippi, who was an NAACP official and prime leader in that community. He was also the first registered voter in the state of Mississippi, a Black voter in the state of Mississippi as well. And so you have the murder of Reverend George Lee that takes place on May 7th, 1955. And then after that, you have the murder of Lamar Ditley Smith out of Brookhaven, Mississippi, NAACP member, also a World War I vet. He was also a great leader in his community. Both of these men were close friends to a man that everyone should know about, and that's Dr. T.R.M. Howard. Dr. T.R.M. Howard at the time was the equivalent, or should I say, the Dr. King of that day. He ended up becoming the mentor to Medgar, Charles Evers, Fannie Lou Hamer, and someone we all know, Reverend Jesse Jackson. And so this is the person who had this huge feud with J. Edgar Hoover in 1955 all the way in 56, frustrated and angry about the murders of his two friends, Reverend George Lee and Lamar Smith, and of course, the murder of Emmett Till. When we talk about Emmett Till being the catalyst of the civil rights movement, I always like to go back and put it in its proper context. We know of Emmett Till's murder, but do you know of the Till rally that a young 26-year-old king he was officiating Dexter Baptist Church at that time, but do you know that the Till rally took place there, as well as it was actually being hosted by Dr. T.R.M. Howard, and one of the people who were in the congregation was Rosa Parks. This happens 4 days before Rosa Parks makes a courageous decision not to get out of her seat or get up from her seat on that bus in Montgomery, Alabama. She said that Emmett Till was foremost in her mind. I had the pleasure of meeting Sister Rosa Parks with Mother Mobley. They were close friends. So Dr. King felt that the murder of Emmett Till was an intimidation factor to keep Black people away from the polls. 1955 in Mississippi was an election year. And so all these things, they call it the Trinity killing of Mississippi, takes place. And then, of course, you have the mobilization of the civil rights movement after. The reason being is because Emmett instantly became the poster child to anti-lynching or the anti-lynching movement. And this is why you had all the civil rights organizations galvanizing behind the murder of Emmett Till, something that we recently saw similar was George Floyd and others. And so I want to talk about those things because it was only in 1956, March of 1956, you have the formation of the state-sanctioned, what I'm trying to say, the Mississippi State Sovereignty Commission, which is like the modern KGB that you would see coming out of Russia. The backdrop of that time, look at the backdrop. It was the Cold War during that time. So all these things is happening. And of course, in August of 1956, later on discover that that was the formation of Cointelpro. So what I'm saying to you, everything we're saying, including Cointelpro, I always, as a filmmaker, I always like to go back and look at the history that was transpired before, because normally you can see the pattern. So what I'm saying, I guess what I'm saying is that Cointelpro is nothing new. These things are happening throughout the South the whole time. It's just that J. Edgar Hoover had took on this and made it a national issue.
Thank you for filling in, the different spaces and kind of painting that picture for us. Thank you so much. All right, my thing just kind of messed up. Okay, so we are at the 30-minute mark, and I just want to thank you to the individuals that are sitting in Clubhouse listening in. Thank you so much, and thank you for tuning into our live panel discussion on the execution of Black leaders. We look forward to our live talk back on Clubhouse in 30 minutes. My next question is for Dr. Julio. Dr. Julio, you are well known for giving renditions of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s speeches. And I overheard you in Clubhouse, and you were mentioning that Dr. King had a speech called America is Going to Hell. Is that the
yes.
he intended to deliver before he was executed?
Yes, the title of that sermon is Why America May Go to Hell. I first gained knowledge of it several years ago when I was speaking with Claiborne Carson. I'm not Claiborne Carson, excuse me, it was a contemporary of his, someone that had studied underneath him. And the young lady brought it to my attention. She asked me to reach out to Claiborne to see if I could acquire that, but I couldn't get in touch with him. However, I was able to develop, taking all of the work that he has done. Dr. King had a very specific and a very unique writing style. I was able to develop a composite based on some of the notes that I had been able to see. I was able to kind of give a fairly, in my humble opinion, a fairly accurate composite of what that speech would have entailed. He was meant to deliver that speech on April 7th of 1968. There were small fragments of notes found in his briefcase with that sermon title, which is where we got the title from when he was killed in Memphis. So it's a very scathing title alone to a lot of people, and to know the style of Dr. King. I think it's even what I have crafted, I think it's a very interesting piece.
We would definitely love to hear it later on tonight on Clubhouse.
Oh yes, absolutely. I will definitely, for those that are interested, will be delivering what I was able to recreate from his work this evening on Clubhouse. So hopefully everyone pulls something from it.
Definitely.
Absolutely. I'm excited myself to hear that later on. So under Cointelpro, the FBI violated the constitutional rights of these leaders given by the First and Fourth Amendments, freedom of speech, and the right to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. Till this day, the FBI building is named after J. Edgar Hoover, who was, as we know, a longstanding director of the FBI and the driving force behind Cointelpro. On Martin Luther King Day, which just passed, the FBI tweeted a message on their Twitter account honoring Dr. King's legacy. I want to throw it out to you guys, and I just want to know, what message does that send to you? And if you need me to read the tweet, I'll do that as well. Just let me know.
Yeah, read it, please.
Yeah, read it.
Yeah, go ahead and read it. Read the tweet for us.
Today, the FBI honors the life and work of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. A quote from Dr. King is etched in stone at the FBI Academy's Reflection Garden in Quantico as a reminder to all students and FBI employees. The time is always right to do what is right.
I think that's a very, that's a very unique quote of his that they chose to put in that building. The time is always ripe to do right. The FBI should have said, the time is ripe to always do right for what we say is right. At the time, and I think when we talk about Dr. King, we have to understand two things. Us as African Americans or as Black Americans now, we glorify him as if we were always riding with him. Dr. King was not popular among Black Americans until after he was dead. The following in Chicago and the northern cities, it was excessively anti-King. It was even more so in Washington, D.C. with J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI, those kinds of things. So I think that's a very disingenuous, almost a backhanded slap in the face from the FBI.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to go, just for time purposes, I'm going to go ahead and throw it over to Beauchamp.
Well, for me, being someone who worked with the FBI with civil rights cold cases, which is, sort of a strange relationship within itself, civil rights and of course the FBI, who could ever think that with jail? But I just think it was, unfortunately terrible marketing. And this is something that I had conversations with them about over and over again when we dealt with other unsolved civil rights murder cases. I really wanted them to be more transparent. I have to say I had confidence in them because a lot of the agents who I worked alongside of were agents of color. They were young people who wanted to see justice done in these cases. And I have to say they made a big effort. Do I believe that they should have could have done a lot better? Yes. But the Till bill is still going on. The investigations are still going on as we speak. Not much has happened in this past administration, but I'm hoping a lot would happen with the new administration coming in. But I would have to say it's terrible marketing. I mean, they need some people who are very conscious about, the messaging that they're putting out there to the masses and to the public. But it doesn't surprise me. The FBI, unfortunately, is a machine. You have a lot of people who are there just there for the paycheck, not really there for moral obligations. And so you're going to get that with any system from the government in that way. And so I just hope that, we're in a better situation right now at this point and that things will change.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I'll allow Obi and then Reverend Thompson to respond to that, and then we'll move on to the next question. Just try to keep it to a minute or less to respond to this. Thank you.
I hate to change it up a little bit because I really was anxious to respond to the last question you had about the neutralization of leaders, and I just want to talk about that just a quick second, because when you and I talked earlier, I thought it was really important to kind of bring that up to today. Because you think about these young folk who are out here and doing their thing. I mean, the great example is the Black Lives Matter movement that happened in Washington this summer. And, neutralization of this whole group of people. And we juxtapose that with what we saw last week with the invasion of the Capitol building. These folk were allowed to just go in and do what they had to do. There was no law enforcement. The lollygag came out, took their time, hung out, and socialized, then left. And now that they're acting like they're so anxious trying to find these folk, you juxtapose that with how they responded to these Black Lives Matter young people who had no violent intentions, who were trying to basically fight for the rights of Black folk to live and to exist. And You know, they got them lined up in formation up on the steps. So, you know, you can't move, you know, you can't do anything. You better not even step on the steps because we are armed and we will get you. But these white clans folk can go in there and do whatever they got to do, take their time for hours. You know, I think that's a different kind of neutralization that happened in that case. Still neutralization, but we're going to stop these people in their tracks from doing what it is that they're here to do. I'm sorry, I'm like, Trina, you skipped me, Miss Trina. I had to get that out. I'm sorry. So the FBI question, I'll let you all deal with that question.
Okay, Reverend Thompson, would you like to chime in on that?
Well, I would follow up the FBI question and what Professor Obi said with this. Emmett Till was the original Black Lives Matter movement, just wasn't called Black Lives Matter. And so what Dr. Obi described as the different reaction to the white terrorist movement, the white supremacist terror movement to Black Lives Matter was the same then as it is now. Because what did they do with the original Black Lives Matter movement leaders after Emmett Till? They surveilled them, they Cointelpro them, and they killed them. Now, I agree with Keith. There are some, young sisters and brothers who are part of the FBI. We've always had allies who look like us in these positions. But it is hypocritical for the FBI to tweet anything about Dr. King's name without also acknowledging that the FBI, that they killed Dr. King. So the only tweet we need to see is, we apologize and we are wrong for the role we played in the assassination of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. That's the tweet we need to see. And then whatever comes after that, we can debate. But until they send out that tweet and take no good, hypocritical, self-contradictory J. Edgar Hoover's name off of their building and wherever else they have anything that reverences him, then there really isn't any kind of conversation to be had. And let me just also mention, Keith is right in terms of what the Emmett Till tragedy contributed to the development of Cointelpro. But keep in mind, before there was the FBI, there was another office, I believe it was the OSS or whatever it was called. And J. Edgar Hoover in his 20s first investigated and surveilled Marcus Garvey. So this was something that, while he was living a secret life, this was someone who had been targeting our servant leaders in this way, going all the way back to the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey. So somebody needs to get to the FBI, and hopefully some of those decent sisters and brothers and with the new administration will speak up and say, we don't need to tweet anything if it doesn't say that we acknowledge our complicity in the martyrdom of Dr. King.
Absolutely. Amen to that. All right. Moving.
Good stuff.
Yes. Yes. You guys are on fire tonight. Okay. So to me, the Patriot Act is the modern day Cointelpro. The act is supposed to be geared towards terrorists, but here in America, that word terrorist or terrorism, I find to be subjective. It's used when talking about Black Lives Matter activists, yet not when there's domestic terrorists shooting up schools and mega stores or rioting at the Capitol. How can we learn from the past and protect those?
Or bombing whole city blocks in Nashville. It's not called terrorism either. Right. Because the businesses, they didn't want to do that because the businesses didn't have insurance for that. So they have to call it something else so they can collect the insurances for the businesses that got blown up. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Absolutely. So how can we learn from the past and protect those on the front lines from secret government operations that are designed to discredit and dismantle? And I'll go ahead and give that question to Keith first, and then we'll just go around the table. Keith, then Obi, then Mark, and then Austin.
I think we have to come to the realization and understand that, the system wasn't made to protect us. Isn't that what Brother W.E.B. Du Bois stated? You know, a system that cannot fail those it was never meant to protect. And I think we have to come to the realization of that. The only way that we could begin to change things is to mobilize together. The movement for racial progress, or should I say, racial progression in this country has never happened by any other way than off of Black misery, death, and of course, the mobilization of Black people. That's the only time that we have ever had racial progression. And so if we're talking about that now, then it's very important to understand where we have been to see where we're going. And this is why my heart has been set up so much on Till for so long, because I truly believe that Mother Mobley understood that her son's story could serve as a tool to man's liberation. If we could arguably say that the civil rights movement was the greatest movement ever created in the history of this country by citizens of this country, then we must look at the murder of Emmett Till and understand it. We're at a time and place now where everyone wants instant gratification. A lot of us don't study as much of this history, and I don't blame you, because if it's not something that you're learning in school and you're not learning at home, and it's not part of your life, I have to do these things because of my role in investigating civil rights murders to protect myself when I'm out there. So I'm sorry to make it so long, but I think it's very important that in order for us to move collectively forward, we have to understand where we have been. And that's the only way.
Thank you. And as I remind you all, please try to keep your responses to a minute long. So next we'll have Obi respond.
Well, I think, kind of tagging on to what Brother Keith said, we got to look back before we can move forward. And one thing that I think we need to realize is there was a kind of culture of privacy within our culture. It's like everything wasn't so public. We got to find ways to strategize and then not be so public. Everybody does not need to know what we're doing as a people. You think about slave revolts, and I hate to say that word slave, I should say the enslaved people revolts that happened on plantations. They planned them very, very privately. They didn't talk about what they were doing, what they were going to do. When it happened, it was done. Same thing with civil rights movement. Martin Luther King, they had these meetings in the churches, and they didn't talk about what happened in the meetings, but kind of how they strategized. When it was done, that's when you knew that it was going to happen. We got to find ways to protect ourselves and protect our plans and protect our information.
Absolutely. Reverend Thompson, would you like to add on to that?
Well, I get in trouble when I say what I'm about to say, but just like we about to go on Clubhouse, and I've been on Clubhouse, I'm not trying to judge anybody, but if Clubhouse had existed in the 60s, J. Edgar Hoover wouldn't have needed Cointelpro. But even worse than that, once again, our people are providing the popularity, the disproportionate participation in consumerism in yet another social medium that we're not getting anything out of. Black people and Black Twitter keep Twitter going. Black folks keep Facebook going. Black folk keep Instagram going. And now here comes Clubhouse, and we're just giving our intellect, our thought, our voices, our creativity through the running of our mouths on a platform that white folks are making money off of. So, at some point, social media is not going anywhere. But at some point, we have to realize social media is not a social justice movement in and of itself. It's not an end. It's supposed to be a means. And as a means, we've got to get off of our rusty dusties and figure out how to build our own social media as Black people, our own Facebook, our own Twitter, our own Clubhouse. Why aren't we doing that? As a brother, Black man who's got something very similar to Clubhouse before Clubhouse was even invented. But we don't want to do that because to us, the white man's ice is still colder. So that's still something psychological. Our brother Obi, y'all hear what he said? He said enslaved people. That's what we say. Folk running around still calling themselves slaves and American descendants of slaves while fomenting division within our own community. And I said it on TV and I'll say it again. That's a new form of Cointelpro, a cyber Cointelpro. That's what Cointelpro did, foment division. They sent people into, it wasn't just about killing folk. They sent people into our organizations to cause mischief and division and confusion. And that's what's still going on. So we have to be very, very careful about, what people are saying, what they're communicating, what platforms we are on, and learn from the lessons of Cointelpro. So when you hear folk running around saying slave, 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 and nobody says that anymore because we matured and evolved from that, that ought to be a red flag. And when we are supporting with our voices these apps and these social media, where we're not getting anything from it. Now, I think that's just something that we have to take more seriously and figure out how to once and for all build our own. I'm sorry.
Thank you. So we're now going to move on to the next question. And because I know, Dr. Julio, you didn't get a chance to respond, I'll let you be the first to respond to this next question. Again, fellas, I'm asking you all to please keep your responses brief. Thank you. So, okay, I have heard people say that they are waiting for another Dr. King or Malcolm X to galvanize the people. Today, we have a lot of women on the front line sacrificing their lives for our rights. Shout out to all the courageous and fearless women out here doing their thing. Also, shout out to Angela Davis. Happy birthday. Today is her birthday. Much love, much respect. So, learning from our history, do you think that today's movement for Black liberation should have a leader, or is it best not to have one single identifiable leader in fear of safety? Dr. Julio, take it away.
I think he's on Clubhouse. It looks like he got disconnected from this.
It's all right. We'll move forward. So I'll go to Professor Obi and then Reverend Thompson and then Keith.
Well, I don't think that today's culture is conducive for just one leader. I really don't. I look at you, Ms. Webb. I see you as a leader and what you're doing with this documentary, and it is my hope and my prayer that there's lots of young people like you that are doing the same thing. I mean, we live in a culture that is so immense now. It's very, very different now than it was when there was a Martin Luther King, a Malcolm X. Now that there's going to be a Brandy Webb, a Miss Trina. There's people that are doing things, and I think that there's enough space in the culture for people like you and people like Trina and people like what Brother Beauchamp has done in the past, and is currently doing too. I mean, there's spaces for different people. I don't think that one person can fill that space.
Thank you. Would you like to respond, Reverend Thompson?
I agree with that. I mean, just like that's why they went after multiple leaders. There's never going to be just one person. What I am a little shy about is what some of us as African Americans seem to want to inherit from the white left and what happened in Occupy, and that was sort of a leaderless structure. I don't know that works either. I think that there has to be, you have to have some structure and some organization. Some seem to think that if you have no leadership and no structure, then that protects people. But then it doesn't really allow for often the best strategic decision making in a movement. So I think I think that's really what the struggle is now. I think it shouldn't be a conversation about an either or, but a conversation about a both and. And then I think the way you resolve that is have not leaders who stay in a position forever, but in position and rotates. Leaders where there is co-leadership, gender-wise and otherwise. I think there are very creative ways to do that, because when you have no leadership, and just one other thing, we have to change, I think, use the term more often not leader, but servant leader. So that implants in the mind of what you're really supposed to do when you are put in a leadership position. You're really supposed to be the biggest servant, not the most, opulent, not the, the person who has everything and everybody's bowing down to. The leader, whoever's put in that position or has that title, is the person who should be the biggest servant of all of those in the organization. And I think if you change that mentality around, that will help a great deal also.
Thank you, Mr. Beauchamp, and please.
Yeah. I'm with Brother Mark here. I don't think we can't play follow the leader this time. We all have the power to be freedom conductors ourselves. And, I like the servant leader tag because one of my mentors, Dr. Les Edmond, who was a former advisor to Malcolm X, he once said to me, stop looking at yourself in this leadership position because it could destroy you. Just trying to fight to keep that role going. He said to me, why don't you look at yourself as being a trailblazer? Because when you look at yourself as a trailblazer, you know that there's only a certain amount of time that you're doing this work, and you have to lay the ground on the path for the next person to come on behind you. And when you do that, you don't have that much stress on yourself trying to be this leader. You know that you're only there to do your part and play your role and just to lay the path for the next person to come behind you. And ever since I did that, I have been able to survive the struggle, I should say.
Thank you. All right. So considering everything we know about the government, I have to ask, where do you guys think America is headed? 30 seconds. We'll start with Reverend Thompson.
To hell if it doesn't get itself together and it doesn't grant our demand for the passage of HR 40, the reparations bill. And if America doesn't realize it's changing and it's no longer a white nation, as James Baldwin said, we've come to the last white country the world will ever see. And this is more than 30 seconds, if it doesn't realize that we're not playing, we don't need tokenism. We want people in positions of power making decisions that look like us and look like the diversity of America. Every other vice president is groomed immediately to succeed the incumbent president. What do they say about our sister? She's too ambitious. So if she were a white man, they'd already be talking about her succeeding Joe Biden and getting it set up in advance. But she can't do that because if a black woman does that, that comes off as too ambitious. If we don't get that straight right away, America's going to go to hell. And then guess what? You'll have Donald Trump back in the White House in 4 years.
Thank you. Mr. Beauchamp?
I'm sorry that wasn't 30 seconds.
Well, look, it's simple and plain. I just think we're going to be on this constant struggle for freedom and justice and equality for all. And that's just the unfortunate thing. Brother, I'm trying to think of a brother's name right quick. I can't think of it right now, but I think it's going to be a constant struggle for us. I see somewhat change, but it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. Let's just put it that way.
Thank you. Professor O.B.?
I agree with Brother Beauchamp and Reverend Thompson, and I cannot. I got to use a couple about 30 seconds to say what a thrill it is for me to be on this panel with both of these amazing brothers, and I had to get that out. Okay, I had to. But anyway, I do think it's going to get better. I do. Being a child of growing up in the 60s, I've seen a lot. I was talking to Brother Beauchamp about going to Robert E. Lee High School, and when he went to Baker High School from the same hometown in Baton Rouge. And what I didn't tell him is I used to wear, I played in the band and I wore the rebel flags on each shoulder. I didn't know what that was. I had no idea, but they didn't want us to know what it was. They didn't teach us what it was. I didn't know what it was, so we're way beyond that. But we've come through this thing with Donald Trump, to me, who is certainly the grand wizard of the United States. That's what he was. He was a grand wizard. There's nothing about him that would make anybody want to just be following him, except that they could join in him with his whole notion of white supremacy. That's the only thing that would draw people to him. But it's all out in the open now, whereas they were under the rocks, when Obama was around. But now they're out in the open. So I really feel like we know what it is, we can see what it is, and we know we can fight it because it's right there now. So I think that because of that, we're going to move beyond this. I really do. I just don't think that eagle is going to win. I just don't.
And perfectly said. It is now time to bring the Facebook Live portion of the discussion to a close. Before we do close, this is the time now where you guys can drop your websites, your social media handles, let people know, where to follow you. And we'll start with the Reverend Thompson.
On Twitter, Make It Plain, and also on Twitter, Minister with 2 T's. On Instagram, Minister with 2 T's. And I'm on this platform that we're on now, Facebook, under Mark Thompson and Make It Plain.
Thank you, Professor Obi.
You can reach me by my name, Michael, last name Obi, on Facebook and also on Instagram.
And Keith Beauchamp.
You can reach me on all social media platforms under my name, Keith Beauchamp.
Thank you. And Dr. Julio dropped out. He's on Clubhouse, but we will post his information in the comments. And before we go, I just want to quickly announce that this week's winners from the Betrayal of a Nation group are Tia Tennell and Lawrence Webb, no relation. Congratulations, Lawrence and Tia. You will be getting free access to watch the documentary once it premieres. Next week, we will choose one winner from those who have joined the group and have invited 5 to 10 people to join, because we're trying to get it, build an audience, guys. So we appreciate your support. We appreciate all your efforts and help.
And so we want to thank each and every one of our panelists for participating tonight. Please follow their pages. And I also want to thank those of you who tuned in on Facebook as well as Clubhouse. The conversation will continue on Clubhouse with questions and comments from the audience. If you haven't already, join our private group of Betrayal of a Nation documentary supporters for updates on the film release. You can also click on the link in the comments to join right now and let us know what you thought about the discussion tonight. You can also follow us on IG and on Facebook. Facebook and IG is Betrayal of a Nation, and on Twitter is Betrayed Nation. You can also please feel free to follow myself and Brandy Webb so that you can have access to the Clubhouse discussion. Until next time, everyone, good night.
Before we end, who are you? What is your name on Clubhouse?
I'm Trina Light on Clubhouse, Light.
There you go. Follow Trina Light, and then it'll let you know which room we're in. That way you can tune in. And again, I just want to give a big thank you to all of my panelists.
Yes.
I value each one of you that are on this stage. I appreciate you guys. I look up to you. So thank you. This was a very awesome and amazing panel discussion. So thank you.
I'm too young to be looked up to. I don't know about that.
Let me just real quick. We got to just salute these young women, because you all are doing great things, and whoever's listening, do what you can to support these women and doing what they're doing, because they are just fantastic, and this work is so important.
This is you all's moment as women. All right, and Kwame Nkrumah said that we will be able to determine the revolutionary awareness of any nation by the political maturity of its women, not of its men, but the political maturity of its women. So this is you all's moment, and real men are not intimidated by women in leadership or women as servant leaders.
Thank you for saying that.
Yes. Awesome. Well, good night, Facebook. We hope that you tune in on Clubhouse. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Have a good night. Thank you.
What a thrill.